Paul was not always known as Paul. Before he became one of the greatest apostles in the Bible, he was known as Saul. And Saul was not a follower of Jesus. He was a man who strongly opposed the early Christians. He believed he was defending God. He believed he was protecting the faith. But in reality, he was fighting against the very work of God. Saul was educated, respected, religious, and passionate. But passion without truth can become dangerous. He watched as Stephen, a faithful servant of God, was stoned to death. Stephen prayed for the people who were killing him, but Saul approved of what happened. After that, Saul became even more determined to stop the followers of Jesus. He went from house to house, dragging believers away. Men and women who followed Christ were arrested and thrown into prison. To Saul, these people were a threat. To the Christians, Saul was a name that brought fear. But while Saul was busy chasing Christians, God was preparing to meet Saul. One day, Saul set out on the road to Damascus. He had permission to arrest followers of Jesus and bring them back to Jerusalem. He thought he was on a mission to stop the church. But God had a different mission waiting for him. As Saul traveled, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around him. It was so powerful that he fell to the ground. Then he heard a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Saul was shocked and he asked, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice replied, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." In that moment, everything changed. Saul realized that the people he had been attacking belonged to Jesus. He was not just fighting men and women, he was fighting the Lord himself. When Saul got up from the ground, he could not see. The man who had been so confident now had to be led by the hand. The man who had been powerful now became helpless. The man who thought he saw clearly was now physically blind. For 3 days, Saul could not see. He did not eat or drink. He sat in darkness, thinking about everything he had done. Sometimes God allows a season of darkness, not to destroy us, but to open our eyes in a deeper way. Saul had been blind long before he lost his physical sight. He could see the road, but he could not see the truth. He knew religion, but he did not know Jesus. He had knowledge, but he lacked revelation. Meanwhile, in Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. God spoke to Ananias in a vision and told him to go to Saul. But Ananias was afraid. He had heard about Saul. He knew Saul's reputation. This was the man who had harmed many believers. This was the man who came to Damascus with authority to arrest Christians. But God told Ananias something powerful. He said Saul was a chosen instrument. God had chosen Saul to carry his name before nations, kings, and the people of Israel. This is one of the most beautiful parts of Paul's story. People saw Saul's past. God saw Paul's purpose. People remembered what Saul had done. God knew what Saul would become. Ananias obeyed God. He went to Saul, placed his hands on him, and called him Brother Saul. That one word carried so much grace. Brother. The man who had once been an enemy was now being received as family. Then something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He got up and was baptized. And from that moment, Saul's life was never the same. The persecutor became a preacher. The enemy of the church became a servant of Christ. The man who once tried to silence believers now began to proclaim Jesus boldly. But Paul's journey was not easy. Some people did not trust him, and we can understand why. The believers remembered his past. They knew what he had done. They wondered if his change was real. Sometimes when God changes your life, people may still remember the old version of you. They may question your transformation. They may doubt your calling. But when God has truly changed you, keep walking. Your life will become the evidence. Paul did not stop because people doubted him. He kept preaching. He kept serving. He kept obeying God. Over time, Paul became one of the most important voices in the early church. He traveled from city to city, telling people about Jesus. He preached in synagogues, homes, marketplaces, and prisons. He spoke to Jews and Gentiles. He planted churches. He encouraged believers. He wrote letters that still teach and strengthen people today. But Paul's calling came with suffering. He was beaten, he was imprisoned, he was rejected, he was shipwrecked, he was misunderstood. He faced hunger, danger, and persecution. But he refused to give up. Paul understood something many people forget. Following God does not mean life will always be easy. Purpose does not remove pain. Calling does not always mean comfort. Sometimes the road God calls you to walk will require endurance, sacrifice, and faith. But Paul kept going because he knew who had called him. He had met Jesus on the Damascus road, and that encounter became the foundation of his life. Paul was not living for applause. He was not living for approval. He was not living for comfort. He was living for Christ. One of the most powerful things about Paul's life is that he did not allow his past to define his future. He could have lived in shame. He could have said, I have done too much wrong. He could have believed that God could never use him. But Paul received the grace of God, and that grace changed him completely. This teaches us that your past may explain where you have been, but it does not have to decide where you are going. God can take the life that looked broken, guilty, confused, or wasted and turn it into a testimony. Paul's story reminds us that transformation is possible. No one looked at Saul and thought, this man will become a great apostle. No one expected him to become a preacher of the gospel. No one imagined that his letters would one day encourage millions of people around the world. But God does not choose the way people choose. God sees beyond the present. God sees beyond the mistake. God sees beyond the reputation. God sees the purpose hidden inside a person. Paul also teaches us obedience. When Jesus stopped Saul on the road, Saul had to make a choice. He could resist. He could ignore the call. He could return to his old life. But instead, he surrendered. That surrender became the beginning of his true purpose. Many people want purpose, but they struggle with surrender. They want God to use them, but they do not want God to interrupt their plans. Saul was on his way to Damascus with his own agenda, but God interrupted him, and that interruption became his salvation. Sometimes what feels like an interruption may actually be God redirecting your life, a closed door, a delay, a disappointment, a moment that humbles you, a season where you cannot see the next step. It may feel confusing, but God may be using it to lead you into something greater. Paul also teaches us courage. He preached even when it was dangerous. He continued even when people rejected him. He wrote letters from prison. He encouraged others while he himself was suffering. That is deep faith. It is one thing to encourage people when everything is going well. It is another thing to speak hope while you are in chains. Paul showed that true faith is not only proven in comfort, it is proven in trials. He did not wait for perfect conditions before serving God. He served God in every condition, on the road, in the city, in the prison, during storms, before rulers, among friends, among enemies. Paul's life was a message, and that message was this: Jesus can change anyone. Grace can rewrite any story. Purpose can rise from the ashes of a painful past. So when we look at Paul, we are reminded not to write people off too quickly. The person who looks far from God today may become a powerful servant of God tomorrow. The person with a painful past may carry a powerful testimony. The person everyone fears may one day become the person God uses to bring hope. And maybe this story is not only about Paul, maybe it is also about us. Maybe there are parts of our lives we feel ashamed of, mistakes we wish we could undo, seasons where we walked in the wrong direction, times when we were confident but wrong, times when we thought we knew the way, but God had to stop us and redirect us. Paul's story tells us that God is not finished with a person because of their past. The road to Damascus was not just the place where Saul was stopped. It was the place where Saul was changed. It was the place where his pride was humbled, his eyes were opened, and his purpose began. Paul also reminds us that purpose does not always mean comfort. He suffered, he was rejected, he was imprisoned, he faced danger again and again. But he kept going because he knew the one who had called him. His life reminds us that when God gives you a purpose, you may face difficulty, but you do not walk alone. So when we remember Paul, we remember the power of grace. We remember that God can interrupt a life that is going the wrong way and redirect it towards something meaningful. We remember that a painful past does not have to cancel a powerful future. And we remember that every life can change when it truly meets Jesus. Paul began as Saul, an enemy of the church, but he became Paul, a servant of Christ. That is the power of transformation. That is the power of mercy. And that is why his story still speaks today. Because with God, no life is too broken, no past is too heavy, and no person is beyond redemption.